Hello, everybody, and welcome to what I'm calling an underqualified light. It's just going to be me today. And the reason for that is that about a week or so ago, a mutual friend of mine sent me this link to the bass from the acapella group VoicePlay, Jeff Castellucci. I think I'm saying his name right. Talking about some tips and tricks and general experiences on his end about being a bass. And while sending me that video, she said, "This seems like something that you would do." And I said, "Okay." And I clicked on the video and I watched it and I said, "This does seem like something that I would do." So behold, here I am doing it. Um, so before we get into this too much, I want to say that I am a bass. I've performed in vocal jazz groups, classical groups, and a cappella groups for several years. I am by no means a veteran professional. Um, I'm not a like a tour person. I haven't made tons of money out being a bass somewhere. It's all been local stuff. And secondly, I'm not a music education major. So please do not take any advice from this and hurt your vocal cords. It's just going to be my personal experiences, things that work for me, things that I have experienced with being a bass in those various different types of groups, and tips and tricks based on that. It's all suggestions. None of it is hard fact, and probably most things when it comes to music aren't hard fact. It depends on the person. So please take all of this with a grain of salt and realize that I am just a person who loves music, who's sung for a long time. I'm by no means an expert on anything other than my personal experience. With that said, there's a couple of different things that I want to talk about, and I'm going to sort of center them around being a classical bass, being a bass in a vocal jazz or an a cappella group, and then one particular person who has really exploded in popularity over the last several months, and that is Corpse, or Corpse Husband. So I want to talk about how he sounds the way that he does in the music that he records, and just when he speaks in general. Um, the reason that I'm dividing them into those three separate categories is that singing in those three ways, or in Corpse's case, just talking and rapping, are all extremely different. They all require you to be a bass, of course, but they're all very different ways of using the bass part of your range. Um, and so my voice tends to surprise a lot of people because I do not speak in the sort of quote unquote bass range. Like I might have a deeper voice than a lot of men, um, but I make the conscious decision to speak more up here. It's a little bit more welcoming. It's less intimidating. I'm a very big person. I'm 6'4". And so I feel like if I talk way down here at the bottom of my register, it can kind of lead to those feelings of, oh, he's a tall giant. And so I make a conscious decision to speak a little bit higher in my register, which leads people to think that my voice is not as deep as it is just in terms of speaking. Um, does that limit my lower register? It's entirely possible. If I were to really lean into those lower notes and speak there all the time, which is what Jeff does. That's what Tim Faust does, who's another one of my bass idols. Avi Kaplan, formerly of the Pentatonics, speaks with a very deep voice, and of course, Corpse is famous on the internet for how deep his speaking voice is. Um, at the same time, you do not have to be a bass who speaks with an incredibly deep voice. Another example of that is my mother, who is a first soprano, who speaks with a relatively low voice for a woman. And so that goes both ways. And so don't think that just because your speaking voice is in a particular register, that you cannot work on or acquire lower or higher notes depending on where your vocal range sits. Now, ways to improve that. There's jokes about how to increase your lower range as a bass, and they usually center around like drinking scotch or smoking. Um, don't do those things, especially if you're underage. If you're a young bass watching this, don't listen to, the old guys in your church choir who are telling you like, yeah, have a cigar before we sing, your voice will go down. That is true, but it's because you're damaging your vocal cords. So let's not use that as our main focus. The way that I would recommend, and Jeff talks about this at the beginning of his video, is he describes it as a sort of like controlled and mitigated but continuous trauma, which sounds bad, like trauma to your vocal cords. That sounds like a bad thing. But I view it similarly to exercising your normal skeletal muscles. Because when we go to the gym and you lift something really heavy, you actually tear microfibers within your musculature, and as they reform and sort of layer over each other, that's how you build more muscle. So that's an analogy that works for vocals as well. If you sing stuff that is slightly lower than you're comfortable with, continuously, regularly, and safely, everything safely, please, I can't say that enough, you can train the lower part of your register to grow. And so I would recommend finding a song that sits just slightly below what's comfortable for you. And that's going to be a different place vocally for every person, and it doesn't really matter where it is. If you want your voice to get deeper, go to the bottom of your range and try and go a little bit below it. Now, does that go forever? Obviously, no. If your vocal cords are just not long enough to truly reach, the really deep blah, 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 blah type stuff, it's just not going to happen. You as a female vocalist are just not going to be able to get down there unless you have, like, nodes, which if you have nodes, please don't be singing. But if you have a naturally deep voice already and you want to work on it, that is a really great way to train your lower register without, like I said, smoking or drinking scotch. And so let's talk about what that looks like a little bit. So I would recommend listening and singing along with the type of music that you are wanting to sing most. Because I will admit that I've sung classical for a very long time. Classical bass is not my strong suit. Classical bass calls for, you will hear choir directors the world over say something along the lines of space inside, you want to have a lot of space, and you make I've heard shrink a dome of a cathedral and put it in your mouth, so you have this really deep, dark, you always think spherical vaulted tone, which is really beautiful in the choral setting. I am really bad at that. Full disclosure, my voice sits really far back in my throat naturally, and so my entire high school and beyond musical experience has been trying to force my voice farther forward. So when I listen to that advice of space inside, I go flat. It falls too far back in my throat. It sounds really weird. It sounds like and I go flat. So for me, jazz and a cappella are the bass world that I can really get into, because obviously jazz and a cappella occupy very different spaces, but in terms of being a bass vocalist, the tonality is often very similar. And the reason for that is that you're going to be one of one or two or the only bass in the group. And so the tonality of your voice is going to be very different from if you were going to be one of 15 basses in a larger choir. And so partially because of the harmony structure in jazz, but also because the groups tend to be so much smaller, the tonal presence for basses shifts from this sort of vaulted space to as far out the front of your nose as you can get it. Obviously not to the point that it sounds affected and cartoony, but you always talk about having it in the mask, and you show a lot of teeth and you do all of these things to bring your tone farther forward so that you get a better presence when you're singing into a microphone. And that is probably the biggest difference between classical bass singing and jazz group or a cappella group bass singing, because 99 times out of 100, unless you are an operatic bass, in which case you are not listening to this because you know more about this than I do, or you got a bass solo in a classical group, you're not going to be singing with a microphone. And so you want that sort of enveloping warmth that comes from a good bass section. When you're singing into a microphone as a bass, you bury that thing in your mouth, which is, you sort of have to get a separate, like, microphone lesson as a bass when you're in a jazz group or a directed a cappella group, because they always tell you, you do like 2 fingers from your mouth or 3 fingers from your mouth or whatever it is that your director wants from you while you're holding your microphone straight. If you are singing a bass line, not vocals, if you are doing a bass line, that microphone should be touching your lip. And that's not an exaggeration, because those notes are so low, usually, in bass lines. They tend to stay pretty far towards the bottom of the bass clef. And there's often not words. It's going to be dooms or booms or daws or whatever. If you were to just sing that like this, it's going to be so quiet, and it's going to be so in your upper lip and mouth area that it's going to disappear before it even gets to the microphone. And so in order to get the type of presence that those directors or you personally are looking for, that microphone is going to be almost in your mouth. And it sounds gross. If you are a performing bass, get your own microphone so that you don't have other people's spit in your face, because I've done the thing with communal microphones, and I got really sick because I put the microphone in my face. I was beatboxing at the time, but that's, it's the similar problem. So if you can, get your own microphone, but that's besides the point. And so when you as a bass, you realize that you're a bass, listen to great bass pieces and find a genre that you love to sing. Obviously, I really enjoy singing all 3 of those genres because I spent my entire college career, the whole 4 years, woo! I spent my entire college career in both a vocal jazz group and an a cappella group. Teach yourself by listening to people who are already well known for being in that world. So all of the names that I listed earlier in this, Jeff Castellucci, Tim Faust, Avi Kaplan, Adam Chance, even when he was in Street Corner Symphony, sometimes he sings the low bass part in Home Free now that he's in Home Free. All of these people who are currently living the life of a professional bass in the a cappella world, listen to how they sing and find a way that works for you. Because the a cappella world is really specific in that the noises that you need to make as a bass are often really strange, because a lot of the time you aren't singing words and you are replicating a bass tone, either from a keyboard or like a bass guitar, or even if it's not a real instrument, it's something that's just been created by a computer. And so the tonality that you need to create and the pitches that you need to get down to are often very different from classical. You will rarely find a classical piece that goes below a low C. That's a C2 on the piano, and that is generally considered like the lowest note for standard classical music. Now, I'm sure there will be people that are like, well, I have sang this piece that went down to a low A flat. Great. Okay, I have too sung a piece that had a low A flat in it. I sang the low A flat. What I'm trying to say is that by and large, you will not get much below that low C, because there just aren't that many basses, first of all, that can sing those notes, period, and even more rarely sound good singing it as a group. And so in classical pieces, you just don't see notes that get that low very often. Folsom Prison Blues, the Home Free cover, Tim Faust sings and sustains an F1. So like, the one that's a couple of half steps from the bottom of the piano, that note. So the depth of pitch that we're talking about here is drastically lower than what you would normally get in classical pieces. And so this is where a lot of individuality starts to come in, and I'm going to talk about a kind of some of the general ways to get down there that have emerged as a cappella has sort of seen this resurgence with groups like Pentatonics and Home Free and Voice Play sort of gaining popularity, largely because of the sing-off, but then once the sing-off ended, of their own volition, which is great for basses like me who, in popular radio, of course, you don't hear those groups on popular radio, but in popular music, don't very often hear people whose voices are as deep as mine. And so the first way that you have to get down to those ultra deep notes is, I don't know. I always called it my dragon voice or whatever, because you sound like Smaug from the Desolation of Smaug movie. And that was really made popular in the a cappella sphere by Tim Faust of Home Free, who is one of, if not my biggest bass inspiration. And so the way that works, and it doesn't really work for an extended period of time. Like you can't sing multiple words this way, but it's almost like a pitched exhale. And so Jeff talks about this in his recording, or his video, which I will probably link in the description if I remember, because it's a really great discussion from somebody who actually does, make money regularly and professionally from doing this, as opposed to just my personal experience. But you have to be really careful with that, the dragon voice, the forced exhale, whatever you want to call it, because for me, it is not particularly comfortable. I can do it. I know how to do it. I know how to, to growl out the F1s and the E1s and whatnot. But it really is not sustainable for an extended period of time. And if you go to a Home Free concert, which I highly recommend that you do, a couple of things you can notice if you pay attention to the pitches that Tim sings and the way that he sings them throughout the set. And what I'm getting at is that sort of forced exhale dragon breath thing happens like 2 or 3 to 5 times max throughout the set. And it never happens for a drawn out, like, multiple words. He's always just holding a note. And it's because it's really hard to control, it's not that comfortable, and it wears out your vocal cords really quickly, in my personal experience. And beyond that, it can be really hard to balance on the production end through your microphone. So let's talk about how to create that a little bit. And when I say that it's a forced or pitched exhale, it really is. It takes a ton of air, which is also why you don't see it done for an extended period of time. And you essentially you need to visualize the pitch like you're going to sing it normally, but you just throw in so much air that you get this rattle that comes out and really helps you accentuate the bass tonality that you already have. So I'm going to grab my microphone here, and I'm going to bring it really close to my face. And I'm not going to know how this sounds until I listen to this back. But essentially what you do is you get as close as you possibly can to the microphone, and then you go, bah. And so the problem with that and doing that into a microphone is the amount of air that is created. And so for those of you who have never sung into a microphone before, or you've never had to deal with balancing your own microphone, when you go into the microphone, the amount of air that you create can actually really drastically impact the sound that you're creating. And you may have noticed it when I just did that. I'm going to now move my microphone back to a safer distance away from me. But So if you let that much air come out and you don't balance it correctly, what you hear in the audience is because so much air gets fed through the microphone that it really distorts your overall sound quality if you don't know what you're doing and the person balancing your microphone doesn't know what they're doing, which the number of sound guys that would be like, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. I know what to do when you get to that part of the song. When you talk about like, yes, I'm going to go down to this thing and go, is probably pretty low. And so if you see Tim perform live, which again, once live concerts are happening, I highly recommend that you do, he cups the microphone, first of all. So he's holding it sideways a lot of the time, or like down here like this. It's not like straight on usually. So he sort of cups it around his mouth, and he completely covers his nose. And so the benefit of that is that it completely cuts off any of the air that might be coming out your nose and getting into the microphone. And the second thing that it does is the small amount of noise that you are creating, because there's just no way to make that sound loudly. It's uncomfortable enough to begin with. The louder you try and do it, the more uncomfortable it is. You will force every bit of sound that you can create into the microphone. And then if you're in a group like Home Free, where you have dedicated sound techs who, travel with you on tour, they know exactly what to do. And so they will live turn up your bass end of your volume as far as it will go, and they will kill everything on the upper end. And what I mean by the upper end is any sort of like treble or upper like echelon volume, they will turn that knob like off for the period that you are singing that note, because all of the airy noise and all of that sort of interference volume is going to be in that upper register. So the air that's coming out, it sounds like whistling air. So it's going to be in that upper area. And then you'll just pitch up the actual noise that you're making as much as possible, and you'll crank the volume, and then you shake dust out of the roof of the auditorium. It's awesome. Everyone loses their minds. That is, in my mind, the more complicated and less comfortable way to go about doing it. The other one is the thing that gets taught out of you, with good reason, in every youth classical choir ever, and that is vocal fry. And so, vocal fry, some people actually speak in, which just kind of boggles my mind. But it's essentially an extremely low air, so like the polar opposite of what we just talked about, vibration of your vocal cords that lets you, again, create pitches that if you were using air, you wouldn't be able to get down to. It's something that a lot of people are familiar with, and it's just when you're singing, you reach a point where it gets really sort of crackly, is a way that I've heard it described. And the reason that they tell you not to do that in a classical group is because, if you've got a choir of like 60 singers, so let's say 15 basses, and every single one of them gets to, a low C and goes, bah, it sounds terrible. And you sound like, you're a group of croaking frogs or something like that. And so, again, it works a little bit in the context of jazz, and then a lot more so in the context of a cappella, because the types of sounds that you're trying to make and the types of harmonic structures that you're trying to create are different. And again, you might be the only bass in the group, so creating a noise that isn't pleasant to listen to on a choral level as a member of a unit doesn't matter. You just need to create, your low E as well and as controlled and for as an extended period of time as you can. And so whichever one of these ways that works better for you, just do it. And so vocal fry is honestly harder for me to explain than the forced pitched exhale is, because it's always just been a thing that I do. Everyone has vocal fry. You can train it by singing in it more, or speaking in it more. Do not, I'm going to say this sort of as a blanket statement. Don't speak in your vocal fry. The reason for that, it's really hard on your vocal cords initially. And once your vocal cords recover, you can actually reach a point where it becomes difficult to not speak or sing in your vocal fry. So, can it be a tool in your vocalist toolbox? Absolutely. It can be a valuable tool as a bass. Don't use it as a crutch, though. So if you are someone who's really more of like a baritone, but there's nobody else in the group who has a lower voice than you, and you use vocal fry to grab some of those lower notes every now and then, and you train it so you have a really good control over it, that's fine. If you are a baritone, same situation, and the group is like, we need you to sing Tim Faust's bass line from basically any home free song, that's a problem. Because you can use it to reach for notes that are outside of your comfortable register. But if it's all you do, you can actually, again, damage your vocal cords substantially. Or, once your vocal cords recover, be stuck talking that way. So it's kind of like that, that old wives' tale that you used to get growing up, like where if you make a weird face long enough, it'll get stuck that way. It's that, but vocal cords. And so, to loop back around to some of the musicians that I've suggested that you listen to, I'm going to pull up a couple of different songs that I have on my playlist that demonstrate pretty obviously some of these techniques. So the first one is going to be Peter Hollins and Tim Faust covering Misty Mountains, which I know every bass worth their salt has a cover of Misty Mountains. But there's a couple of things with that. First of all, if you are someone who's trying to expand your bass register, Misty Mountains is a fantastic way to induce a little bit of that intentional low-level trauma. Because for me, the far over the misty mountains cold, 2 dungeons deep, is like comfortably low and then reaches down just a little bit every now and again. So it's a really good way to sort of wake up the bassiness in your voice without hurting yourself. So we're going to listen to the opening line here and then the very end. And I'm going to explain a little bit the difference in tonality that Tim uses. Far over, so you hear how airy and spacious that is. Misty mountains cold, 2 dungeons deep. So again, very luscious, a lot of air. There's actually some space there. He's doing as much as he can to remove the countryness from his voice as possible. Now let's cut to the very end, and we're going to see a total change in tonality here, and he's going to go for this like dragon's breath forced exhale thing that I don't really have a name for, and it's going to be really the only thing that we're hearing, so it's going to be a perfect example of what this sounds like. He's going to hold it for a long time. And so you can actually hear in that recording exactly how much air he's creating. Well, probably not even exactly, because that is a studio recording. So they have, fixed that and doctored that up to sound exactly how they want it to. And still, there's a ton of air in that sound. You can hear it if you really turn your volume up. You can hear it sort of over the top, floating over that pitch. And mountain tall. And again, just doing that has already made my vocal cords tired. It feels like I've been talking for a couple hours after doing that. So it works in those circumstances when you're really looking to, you know, impress a crowd. It works great in a cappella groups that are a lot about the show. It is a way to reach those lower notes than you would be able to reach otherwise. But in my personal opinion, it is not a great, nor is it a particularly sustainable way to sing low notes. So now let's talk about Folsom Prison Blues, which is the home free cover of the Johnny Cash song, where he sings a note that's even lower than that, and he sings it in vocal fry. So let's listen to this a little bit. I think we're going to have an Adam Chance bass solo at the beginning here, which is another person that is great to listen to for sort of getting your tone set. And again, because it's a vocal solo, a little bit more classical.
I hear the train a-comin'.
It's still forward.
It's rolling round the bend, and I ain't seen the sunshine since I don't know when. I'm stuck in Folsom Prison, and time keeps dragging on.
You can hear Tim grumbling down underneath.
But that train keeps on rolling on down to San Antone.
To be perfectly honest with you, I think that San Antone is the hardest note in that entire song. Reason being, placement of tone as a vowel just naturally falls down the back of your throat. If you can sort of visualize the inside of your mouth and you say something like tone or bone or throne, you can feel how it drops into the back of the throat. For basses, that is a death sentence for your pitch. Because that lower note at that spacious tonality, it just like disappears down the back of your throat. So let's cut ahead a little bit here. Let's see if I can find this. I believe it's an F1 that Tim goes down to.
Cheers me. What I got to do.
All right, here we go. This is Tim's solo.
If that railroad train was mine, bet I'd move it on a little further down the line. Far from Folsom Prison, that's where I'd want to stay.
Hear how forward that is.
And I'd let that lonesome whistle blow my blues away.
Now, if you watch the music video for that, which I highly recommend that you do, you can see the smile on Tim's face as he sings, way. Then he's like, yeah, I know that this is cool. Part of that, he has a lot more experience and his voice is just straight up deeper than mine. Second, can't overstate enough how important it is to have a really talented sound team in the booth for you. They are so much the backbone of a cappella groups, and they don't get anywhere near enough credit. So if you are ever in a group that like travels with a sound person and you are a bass, you need to thank that man, woman, or individual, or whoever they are, because they are making you sound so much better than you would just singing into an unbalanced microphone. But to step away from that a little bit and to just focus on what that actually sounded like, you can hear how little air there is in that pitch. But it's not wrong. And so that is probably the end-all be-all struggle for basses, right? That's a natural thing that happens when we hit puberty and our voices get really deep. It is so easy because of that tone placement, like for me, naturally to sing far back in my throat, to sing notes flat. Bass sections, notoriously flat. Of course, choirs in general are notoriously flat, but bass sections in particular, especially, and young bass sections even more so, it is so hard to keep that pitch pure, which is one of the benefits of being the only bass in the group. So your F1 is the F1, which, you know, is both a good thing and a bad thing, because if your relative pitch is pretty good, then it's not much of an issue. But if you're singing a vocal that drops as low as some of the home free vocals or pentatonics vocals do, and you are flatting yourself, that's, you're just digging yourself a hole that you're not going to get out of, because you're going to be lowering the pitch of the group to the point that you're going to be trying to like vocal fry notes that shouldn't be in your vocal fry, and it gets messy. Because I think that a really good way to look at it is that your vocal fry is almost like an inverse falsetto, if that makes sense. Because for men, the falsetto is a very different timbre. It's a totally different part of the register. You don't sing it the same way that you do things in your chest voice or even in your head voice. And so one thing that a lot of male vocalists have to work on is that passaggio where you flip from your chest voice into your head voice into your falsetto. Same thing applies for vocal fry. If you're going to be using vocal fry on a regular basis, you will need to get adept at going from that more classical vocal soloistic bass down into vocal fry or the pitched exhale, whatever you decide is the way that you want to sing those ultra deep notes. Because I was going to say the average bass. The average bass doesn't have an F1, period. But the average really good a cappella bass can't sing an F1 the way that you sing an E2. Because an E2 is about where Misty Mountains sits, and if you are going to be a bass on your own in a group, you should be able to sing Misty Mountains, the solo line, in your chest voice. Far over the misty mountains cold to... Doesn't have to be loud. Don't force anything. To... That should be comfortable, airy, easy to do. If you do not have that, you're probably not going to be able to be the only bass in the group. I'll put it that way. Because you cannot healthily, in my opinion, use vocal fry as a crutch for not having those lower notes. You can't just do it all the time. It's too hard on your vocal cords. So now, let's talk about corpse. Corpse is a completely different situation. And I'm once again going to grab my microphone here. So bear with me. Because Corpse talks in his vocal fry at all times. He is a YouTuber, and I think he streams on YouTube, and he also releases very angry, profanity-laden, but bopping rap music with this type of voice. And so, I've never interacted with him, obviously, I've never met him, but he always speaks that way. And so, having never known him, I would diagnose, if you will, that he is one of those people who made, it might not be a conscious decision, but has over time elected to speak in his vocal fry. His voice is naturally extremely deep, and the vocal fry pushes it beyond that point. It takes it even lower, and it makes it sound like, a golem is talking to you. And so, his voice, part of why it is so shocking and so overwhelming, in a good way, it takes people aback, and they say, "Oh my gosh, who is this guy?" when they hear him for the first time, is that a lot of basses, myself included, either consciously or unconsciously, choose to speak higher in their register. And so I'm going to pull up a couple of Corpse songs here, and again, lots of profanity, so just be aware. And we're going to listen to and then talk about just how deep his voice is and why it is that deep. So this is White Tea. He's something else.
I spill wine all on my white tee. Bitches like me. Corpse you off the deep end. Well, bitch, I might be.
So I would highly recommend that if you like EDM, rap, hip hop, whatever, that you check out Corpse. He just did a song with Machine Gun Kelly. It's all over the YouTube sphere. He truly does not sound like anyone else. And the reason for that is that he speaks in his vocal fry on these tracks at all times. So this is the level that I'm talking about, that I'm actually encouraging you as a bass to not strive for, because it's really cool. It's incredible. His voice is truly unique, but it's really limiting in your long-term speech pattern, if that makes sense. And so I just listening to him and talking about being a bass over the course of this podcast, my voice is sort of dropping down into that vocal fry world. And so he just gets really, really, really close to his microphone. And he's, I spill wine all on my white tee. And then you can do things post-recording. You know, I mean, obviously these songs are super bass boosted and they have really good beats to them and all of these things that sort of add, what's the word that I'm looking for? They add depth in like a, breadth, excuse me, they add breadth to the piece. So everything has to be low because his voice is so low that if everything else that was going on was pitched like a normal song, so to speak, it would just sound out of place. So the one that, let's see, let's do Miss You. Again, more profanity. You hear how deep the bass is.
I don't wanna look like this, fuck. I don't wanna feel like this, fuck. Wish I didn't miss her so much. Knew that this would happen, fuck. Love, break a mirror, yeah, fucking break a mirror. Glass shatter, gums bleed.
So, the thing that makes Corpse truly unique is you can hear that he is actually producing air in that tone at what is essentially a vocal fry. And so that is where we start to stray into the territory of he's just unique. I can sort of imitate Corpse without doing that 24/7 for, years. My voice it just doesn't descend to the point that that's something that I can do. I mean, I can sing the words at the pitches that he sings them, if that counts as singing. I can vocalize them. How's that? But to be able to get the airiness is something that is just truly unique, and is why I think that you should listen to him, even if you maybe don't like that type of music, to just sort of at least once be in awe of a set of vocal cords that was created and then has been worked on, over the course of his life, into something that we just don't hear on a regular basis. I've never heard him actually sing. So he raps, and he actually does a heavy metal scream too. So you've got the very bottom of the register and then way up at the top, which screaming is something that I can't do, so I'm not even going to talk about it. So I truly don't know if he could carry a tune, if that makes sense. I don't know how good his pitch control is, speaking down there that long, because I can tell you as I get closer and closer to the microphone here that, I can produce very similar Corpse sounding noises, but things get really rattly and out of control down here. And I don't know how his breath doesn't always end up like smacking through the microphone. He has a better microphone than I do, and he knows how to pitch it and like EQ it better than I do. So for those of us who are not corpse, I hope that some of this rambling was interesting to you. Corpse, if you somehow see this, hi, I'm a big fan. Tim Faust, Jeff Castellucci, again, I'm sorry that I butchered your name. I will put your link in the description if I remember to do so. If not, full credit to this idea to Jeff. Avi Kaplan, formerly of the Pentatonics, now on his own. I revere all of you. Sorry, I'm having a hard time doing this without laughing. Anyone else that's watching, thank you for watching. I hope that this was perhaps not educational, but at least interesting. And thank you all so much. And I hope that you tune in next time for either regular Underqualified or Underqualified Light. Thanks so much.